thank you all for joining us. And I'm not surprised about this. We have a great group of artists and a curator and arts writer today with us. And as you know, we will be speaking about artists in art fairs. And maybe as a way of introduction, I want to say a couple of words, and I actually want to go back to the year 1970, and I'll do it very, very quickly. 1970 when Art Basel was established, and at that time there were only two more art fairs of this kind. The other one was in Cologne and the other one was in Brussels. So it wasn't surprising because these art fairs emerged in places that didn't necessarily have a great concentration of galleries, unlike cities like New York, Paris, or London. So the main motivation behind initiating this type of fairs, it was to create this network between the local galleries as well as international collectors. And clearly, a lot have changed since 1970s. Today, art fairs offer this type of exchange platforms, discussion platforms. They have curated exhibitions and they commissioned artworks. So the idea of participation is becoming quite interesting as well because they don't only attract buyers but as well as non-buyers. And it's something that we will be speaking about today. So the idea behind this panel is to speak about how artists themselves, how they've been responding to this major transformation. And some people celebrate it and some people are quite skeptical about this development, and we will be speaking about these changes. And I would like to start with Paco, if I may, because you've done extensive research about the historical evolution of art fairs. I started with 1970, but your research actually goes back, way back in history. Maybe we can start with you, and if you can speak more about how you, as an arts writer and as a curator, how you got interested in art fairs, and how has this research influenced the way that you think about your own practice?
Yeah. Hi there, thank you for coming, lots of people. Thank you, Özge, for inviting us, and Stephanie and Art Basel. Actually, I started first as an art writer and then as a curator, and I got the possibility of curating a show or a section at an art fair in San Juan de Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean. So you're not going to say no to that, you know? So I went there. It was a small art fair, 35 galleries, and then for some reason the artistic director left and they offered me the job as artistic director. And I said, why no? Why not? Let's go to Puerto Rico. And then they also offered me to work for Photo Miami. They were launching Photo Miami in Miami. So I said, 2 times a year the Caribbean, that's unbeatable. Anyway, so on the other hand, as I'm a writer and a curator, I saw that there were no books because art fairs still today, there are no books. I've been writing one in 2008. It was, I have to say now, very optimistic. So I thought I have to write a new one, which is more realistic. But what I loved about art fairs was that you could experiment with the platform. And that was what I was doing, you know, as a curator. So I came out with a section that was called On the Spot. So I invited 2 other curators and myself. So every day one curator had to walk around the fair and look at the artworks and then come up with a curated or concept-based exhibition. And then he had a spot. We asked the artworks, then he had to do the setup, and at the end of the day, he was explaining his concept. So this idea of instant curating or relational curating, if you want. And that was very fun. So every day you got an exhibition at the end, you put it down, and then the day after, another curator did the same stuff, and then the day after. And I thought, well, I think art fairs are great to experiment. And also what I thought it was interesting was to do it on site and work with artists and the galleries that are there. It's, of course, if you do a curated section and you target a gallery, it's nice. But this was something more instant, and also you didn't have to bring the works. They were already there. So, and it was fun. And then in the end, also after some years and doing Photo Miami, I use all these experiments to write the book. So that was my connection to the art fair.
Do you want to say only a couple of lines about the book?
Yes, okay. So I wrote a book in 2008, and I started with a little bit with the beginning of the market in the Renaissance. But then I just 2 years ago I quit. I was working in Santiago de Chile in a contemporary art center, and then I wanted to research again. So I wanted to do some more historical research about art fairs and biennials. And as you see here, this image, it all starts with Rome. Actually, feria means the feast day. So it historically started there, and then you see that the fairs have this religious origin. Then you get the Antwerpse Pand, that's in 1460, 1470. It was artisanal. And then you have in the Netherlands, you get the Haagse Kermis. But kermis or kermes, you know, this is kerk and mis. So this is church, you know, and mass. So they have these kind of original religious origins. And then they start, basically, you move on to the World Fair, which is industrial. At the beginning, the first one in 1851, there was no art, only some sculptures to exemplify the fabrication process. But in 1855, when they did it in Paris, you know, artists were there. They were competing like they were selling other products. And then, ever since, they participated at the World Fair. So art was there, besides manufactured products, raw materials, and so on. And then we got what I would call the first modern sales platform, art fair, Salon des Indépendants. You know, they set up by artists, and also under the motto, no jury, no prices, so that artists could see directly what they were doing, and also they were sales platforms. So artists set it up, the association, to sell. And then we got the modern art fair. What I call the modern art fair is the Armory show. It was held only once, so some people would argue it's an exhibition, but I say it's an art fair because it was also set up by American Association of Painters and Sculptors to create every year like perennial exhibitions for sales opportunities for the artists. And actually the Armory show was really a fascinating event, because it was the first time in history that you got something, you got North American art and you got European art. And that was what later in 67 and Art Cologne and Basel in 1970 were going to do. And also in terms of communication, the Armory show was really radical. They hired a press manager. They organized the pre-openings. They did like a beefsteak dinner for the friends and foes of the fair. They published books, buttons, everything. That was really a very contemporary take. And also, it was a curated art fair, because the American section had been curated by Arthur B. Davis, and the international section by Walter Pach. And the artists were there, were at the show, selling the works directly. And Duchamp he was not physically there, but he was the big guy. You know, he sold all the works, and his nude descending the stairs was a really scandal. So that was great. And then we got 1967, 1970, what I consider the contemporary art fair. But normally, when we look back at history, we look in a very anachronistic manner. That means that we intend to interpret the past seen from the present. So that means that if we look at Art Cologne and Art Basel, we think they had these, parties, curated sections, and whatever. No, nothing at all. I mean, in those years, the 68 is an iconic year, because it's May 68, but also because until 68, Venice was a sales event. Yes, sales event until 68. We think, a biennial is a biennial, art fair is an art fair. No, it has nothing to do. So it has always been mixed. So Leo Castelli, Santi Yanis, they wanted Venice to stop. selling because they considered that that was illegal competition. So in 68, Venice stops selling, but in 67, Cologne had started the art fair, and in 1917, Art Basel. So there is a connection between Venice as biennial stop selling and these fairs coming up and doing sales, no? And, but in that time, for example, artists were not at art fairs. Because in 68, you know, the market, that's not nice. Even museums, now you find at all the art fairs that museums set an exhibition and things like that. But in those years, for a museum to be associated anyway with an art fair, that was really horrible. And it's very interesting because in 1970, 71, Beuys does a performance at Kunstmarkt Köln. That was the title then, because Art Cologne was organized by the Association of Progressive Galleries from Cologne. And they were not very progressive because they didn't even let galleries from Berlin or Düsseldorf participate. So Joseph Beuys, also with Wolf Forstel and some dealers, did literally a performance at the door, you know, with stones and things like that. And it was and the name was "We Will Enter the Art Market." It was really funny. Okay, so as you see, the relationship with artists at art fairs is complicated because traditionally, also in the Renaissance and whatever, only bad artists sold at art fairs, you know? And if I say the names, Jan Mulder, Willens de Kok, whatever, you never heard of and you will never hear. Because all the top artists like, for example, Rubens or Hieronymus Bosch, they were high-end. They had high-end dealers. They had commissions, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's fascinating. And now, what I call the global art fair since mid-90s, this is the global model, because now you go to any art fair in the world and you find it normal that you come and attend a panel, that you see curated sections, that you see a video program, whatever. But before the 90s, that didn't exist, you know? So that's something recent. And now, of course, artists are the main actors. You see them here talking. They do performances, installations, whatever. And the worst thing that have happened to artists throughout history was art history. Because traditionally artists were the ones with the knowledge, were the ones who could, the connoisseurship, whatever. And art history came, and then it pushed artists in a very subservient or insignificant role. Thank you.
Definitely come back to your statement. But maybe, Hai-Hsin, we can continue with you, because in the last couple of years you've been making drawings and paintings of different types of public spaces, you know, ranging from parks to art museums. And I think only recently did you start working on Art Basel as a particular series. So I'm curious if you can speak more about what prompted you to start that series after, as part of this larger thinking about public spaces.
So my main focus of my painting and drawings, that my inspiration from my daily experience, like from life, like just from daily life. And before this Art Basel before this, like for 3-4 years, I've been working on a lot of images I observe in museums. Like I like to look at people looking at art and like all the details in the museum, like the corner, the material, and all the human behaviors in like all the art spaces. And this time, like I got the opportunity to present my work in Art Basel, and my gallery was asking me to have a project in Art Basel, but I feel it's kind of weird to create a special project for the art fair itself. So I was thinking how to connect with my previous work. So I just came up with the idea, why don't I just extend my previous idea, like drawing and painting the people looking at art in art fair itself. So I just made a project called Art Basel, and to show in Art Basel. Yeah.
do you want to say just a couple of sentences about what we see in the images? Because yeah, we don't immediately see the slides, or maybe we are on the right time right now.
Oh, this
is from the Met.
Yeah,
right?
this is my previous work from. Yeah, I made it like a. Like 3-4 years ago. I'm based in New York, and I spent a lot of time like walking around in museums. So it's so familiar to me. I just draw and paint people like a tourist, and I mostly look at people in the museums. So I just draw them like in a large scale. And so this time in Art Basel, I made a almost 5 meters long big drawing, and I just draw Art Basel itself, because I've been always like visiting big art fairs for the past maybe 10 years, and my impression to art fair is like it's so huge. And every time I came out from a big art fair, I barely remember anything. And to me, it's like a big maze. So I just want to recreate this scene, like this impression. Like I might make the art fair like a big maze, and I just put all the details from different years on different locations of Art Basel. And I went to, the last time I visited was in last year, Art Basel, Miami. So I just made the research. I took a lot of photos, snapshots, and then I just draw everything I saw at the art fair. And then also Google, Instagram, hashtag Art Basel, and to puzzle all the elements that I remember were very impressive to me and into this piece. Yeah.
And that idea of display is something you, Michael and Ignar, you've been working on since the mid-1990s. It's been a very long time. And your work has been committed to art objects, but also their displays, their settings. And I'm curious how you got interested in this particular format and how you started responding to it in specific ways.
I'd still like to start though with the famous quote by Baldessari. That's been quoted to exhaustion, but on the theme of art fairs and artists and the relationship between the two, it's still important. I mean, Baldessari said, being an artist at an art fair is like watching your parents having sex. You know it's happening, but you don't want to see it. But, I mean, everyone focuses in this quote on the aspect of the commercial. But there's another very sweet aspect with it, I think. It's the aspect of intimacy. He calls the gallerist his parents, basically. And I think this intimate relationship is quite important. I mean, it is actually the reason why we are here as artists. I mean, there's people that we have a long-term relationship with. I mean, we have been active for almost 25 years as artists and worked with galleries for 20 years. So, that's a long-term relationship. And one that evolves over time, and you learn from each other. And if the gallerists are good parents, they let you play. And we've been lucky enough to have galleries that have let us also play in this context to test the limits of the art fair, to find out what it is, what is our role, what's their role in it, and what's our role as artists. And when you see one image that will come up at some point of two blonde gentlemen working in the same booth next to each other. It was actually a project that we did with our then gallerist in Berlin, Klosterfelder, in the early years of Frieze, where Frieze let us get an extra booth next to Klosterfelder's booth, and we convinced all our fellow artists in the gallery to give us two versions of the same work. So basically, one booth was an exact copy of the one next to it. And Klosterfelder himself very kindly grew his hair out so we could make a wig out of his hair. and put it on this doppelganger that we found, an actor from Berlin. And it was kind of hilarious because even though they were right next to each other, people went in and forgot what they had seen in the booth before. And people also that knew Martin Klosterfelde intimately still went up to the fake Klosterfelde and approached him and said, "You owe me money," or "When are we going to do the show with Elmgreen and you know?" And it just shows that the attention span might be a little bit too short in these big, spectacular contexts of the art fair.
We also did the ultimate perfect art fair for ourselves. We did an art fair when we were invited to do a show at the UCCA in Beijing, and we shaped the whole exhibition space like a commercial art fair, the normal fishbone grid of the booth, and then we exhibited only our own works and of course curated it according to our own taste, and nothing was for sale. Because we were a bit fed up with people coming up to you with a very worried look all the time saying, "Don't you think it's horrible as an artist to show an art fair?" In an art fair, in the context of an art fair, they were there, we were there. And of course, if we thought it was so horrible, we wouldn't be there. It's not always optimal, but I mean, it's just a format, and you can change it, and you can challenge it. So we thought, well, let's test out that format and make an art fair in our own name called The Welfare. And people came and was moving around like they were going to an art fair, but it was a non-commercial show.
Iván, can we continue with you?
Okay.
Maybe the idea of display, but also the way that you did site-specific and context-specific works at the art fairs.
Sure. Well, I've made one work that was specifically made for an art fair in New York in 2012, I think. It was called the Armory Fair, the Armory Fence, and the idea was to completely enclose the perimeter of the booth with a neon fence, with an electric fence, basically. So the idea was to completely change the usual circulation that people have in an art fair, which is to enter the booth and see the pieces. And in this case, the people weren't allowed to enter the booth, and but they could see that inside the booth there was nothing, and the piece was only the perimeter of the fair. I mean, of the booth. And for me, this is it was more like a response to the I would say the relationship that art fairs create between artists and their gallery. That I feel that is creating this problem that the public is not going to see shows to galleries anymore, because the art fairs are pleasing the people by making the complete event in one site, which is have a conversation, have a show, have a critique, have magazines. So it's like a mall, right? So for me, was to make that piece was commenting in all this kind of situation that art fairs create. And one important reference that I had when I made the piece was actually going back to the late 60s, 1969. And a very important piece for me and a very important artist for me in many things that I researched, which is a work by Robert Barry from 1969, and the piece was called Closed Gallery, very similar to the circus tent that we saw here. But for me, a total visionary in that feeling, in that connection between what's happening between the gallery and the artist. So he made this fictional show. So the project is basically invitation cards to a show in 3 different cities, and there was only written a sentence in the card, and the sentence says, during the exhibition, the gallery will be closed. So there was basically the frustration of doing a show in a gallery or trying to make a show, or that was it, that was the show. So that's the piece that I've been talking about. So for me, that's the main issue of working within an art fair. Like, how the art fair affected the process and the work of artists, that basically now at this point, artists have to just deliver finalized products to art fairs, because the process of the work, it really, I mean, who is interested? Only probably the artists at this point, but the buyers, I don't feel they are. So.
Quick follow-up question. You've been working with neon, artificial light, and sound as symbols and also tools of power for a very long time. Do you think it was
tools of what?
Tools of power.
Power, okay.
And symbols of power, if I may put it that way.
Yes, yes.
Was that something that you were thinking about when you produced that particular work?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it has that particular piece has many interpretations. You know, we can talk about the barriers in the territories, in national borders. You know, where people aren't allowed to cross the limits. And it has to do with how electricity, because I grew up in a context where I'm originally from Chile. I grew up during the dictatorship in Chile, which was between 1973 and 1989. I was born in 1972, so my whole childhood was during a dictatorship. And the idea of the electricity and the electric the artificial light was a way of keeping people in certain behavior, either producing a blackout during the day or during night, so people have to be obliged to be at home during the night, or in the most extreme situation that I have made serious about to use electricity as a torture, as a tool of torture. So all those layers of meaning are part of my body of work, not in a literal way, because I'm more interested in the poetry of the materials. But yeah, all that background is part of it, for sure.
I would like to go back to that idea of display and exhibitions, and I want to ask the artists in our panels about what differences or similarities do you think there exist between exhibitions of contemporary art, between biennials, museums, and art fairs, and how you tackle that in your own work. You already started talking about some of these examples, but maybe we can push it a little bit more.
I mean, we have been in many panels where people were overly concerned about the spectacle of art fairs and biennials. And when we asked them when they last time went to an artist off space, they often haven't visited that for quite a long time. Because I don't think that the art fairs and the biennials are taking away from the interest of off spaces, alternative spaces, other formats of showing art. I think it can be part of even increasing the interest. I mean, like, I'm not so nostalgic about art. Like, even in the 80s, the art world was very elitist. It was for the very few. And I think we're filled with guilt of the success that we have obtained in recent years, and therefore we are not very good in managing our sudden attention and use it in a constructive, critical way. It's almost like we would like the audience to go back out let us alone, let us speak only to each other, let's be introvert again. I mean, it's beautiful that people are lining up to have an experience, and maybe some parts could be refined a bit and tuned in so that experience would be even better.
Can I say something? But going back to the idea of, don't you think that for the artist not being able to create, to work with the space, to create larger installation doesn't diminish it there in a way, and have to be obliged to present a wall piece most of the time?
I was terrified about the white cube galleries when I started doing art. I didn't come from an art educational background, so everything was very new for me. We had a residency in New York, and we would come into one of the galleries with a very, very high counter. And there would be a very tired-looking gallery girl or boy sitting tapping in the computer, look up at you, registered, student closing, down again. And that would be how you would celebrate the art exhibition in the gallery. I was terrified about that environment. I found it so hierarchic, so ignorant, so arrogant. Now I'm used to it, so now I can deal with it in a different way. But I don't think one format is fantastic compared to the other. I like the randomness of the fair as well, the chaos, the introduction of something completely new and unknown, because like a smaller gallery is actually allowed in for a cheaper price to show a young artist, and you stumble about it and say, oh wow, that's actually quite cool, but you wouldn't see it maybe in a different context, because we often try, both in the galleries and in the biennials, to filter, and here you can get a surprise.
Of course.
Since some years now, there is this discussion, this black and white discussion about if art fairs are killing galleries, you know? Jerry Saltz, with his populist style, wrote about it, and now some other, finally some dealers start to speak out. But as I wrote on in his Instagram, I think that's not asking the right question, you know? Because as far as I know, nobody obliges you to participate at a fair. Nobody takes a gun and says, you have to participate. And also, if you as a dealer are complaining and you have been doing art fairs for 20 years and suddenly it doesn't work, maybe you have to think why it isn't working. And also you have to understand that if you participate at Art Basel, for example, at a project room, whatever, you're accessing certain kind of museums, institutions, collectors that normally you wouldn't access if you participate in Pulse or whatever. So I think that it's just an art fair, it's just another platform. Good, bad, it depends. But I think that the right questions that we have to ask are, one, why aren't galleries able to find new distribution channels? Two, why aren't galleries able to find new collectors? And that's the real story, in my point. You can go to a fair or not, and fairs, of course, fairs also have to reformulate, because we see some kind of what they call fair fatigue, and of course, or maybe the format needs to be readdressed, maybe less curated fairs, and maybe fairs need to work more in getting new collectors, because I've seen all the collectors, you know. So of course they have to do their job too. But the thing is that galleries are not doing their job. And when I see those interviews with dealers, and they speak about how they complain about art fairs, I find them totally unsexy, because I see that they don't know the history of the art market, and they are talking about things that 300 years ago were already put in practice. and they knew what worked and what didn't. So I think that first we need to, learn a little bit more about our métier, about our profession, and then pick out what worked, and then try new strategies. And I think that dealers need to do a little bit more than just complaining or just going to art fairs. They need to experiment more with other platforms. Thank you.
I would like to go back to the question and ask you, Hai-Hsin, about your own observations between the museums and art fairs. Because when we were looking at the large-scale drawing, the Met, in terms of the structure, it's very much similar to the Art Basel drawing that you recently made. Maybe we can start with that.
Yeah, it's similar, but still I think it's different. For me, the museum is for everyone, and of course, art fair is also for everyone, but still, it's not really. It's like saying everyone can take a flight to go abroad, but you have to pay the flight ticket. And even you take a flight, there are different class. So I feel the difference. So like in my museum series, I feel I focus on more like variety of people and the different behavior, more like touristic and like just different. Like in art fair piece, I'm more focused on it's not making fun of maybe, but more like exaggerate like how like rich people behavior and like can see the hierarchy and can even see like the staff working here like holding the signs. Like last time I went to Miami at Basel, I see people holding the staff holding the signs like first choice, and I was asking my friends, first choice? What's first choice? How about the second? Or what else? How many choices? So it's funny to me, like to see the layers of different type of peoples in like different venues. Yeah.
Can you say a couple of words about what you place in the very middle of these two works? One of them is, as far as I can remember, it's an information desk.
Yes.
The reception desk, and
Yeah.
the other one is also a gathering point.
I'm sorry.
The Art Basel one, the very large-scale drawing that you made, at the very center of it, it kind of attracts your attention, right? You start with the center, and then you start going to the different directions in the work. And there's also a gathering point, if I remember it correctly.
Like the very center of the piece is like a huge, like fancy lunch, and with some chef with like high chef hat, and fancy people, and like meeting important people, and doing fancy stuff. And in my math drawing is a information desk with just general public. Yeah, that's the difference. Yes.
Maybe going back to what you were saying about the critiques, the urgency to criticize art fair, because one of my initial questions for you was that whether you consider your works that respond to art fairs as part of this genre of institutional critique somehow, but maybe you're just playing with the display. So I'll try to revise the question and say that if we are expecting artists, curators, critics, or other people to shape conversations about this particular format, who are these people? And do you consider yourself as that part of group who really want to shape the conversations about this format?
I think institutional critique is a complicated term. I mean, it's sort of is used maybe for a certain part of recent art history as well, and you maybe think of older generations like Michael Asher, for instance, who's been very inspirational to us. But I think our approach is anyway different, and it's more about identity, diversity, about personal engagement with the situation, actually being in dialogue much more, or in a different way maybe. And we could say we do institutional critique, but in a way that we also use personal critique. I mean, we'll also like to look at ourselves critically. I hope we do. And I think that's important to evolve yourself and any relationship that you're in. Thank you. So, I mean, we basically started out already from the beginning, after this experience with the first encounters with the white cube and the conventions of the art world, we decided to sort of challenge these structures very directly. Partly inspired by the writings of Michel Foucault, and we made a whole series of works called Powerless Structures. Foucault talks about power structures, and these structures always being sort of able to morph. A structure can always change, it can be exchanged. There's something sort of optimistic about it. I mean, a power structure is per nature malleable or alterable. And we sort of use this more philosophical thought to look at physical structures around us. So one of our very early pieces was actually like painting the white cube over and over again for 12 hours. The piece is called 12 Hours of White Paint, and that's what it was. From noon till midnight, we were using about like 50 gallons or 150 liters of paint, and the structures of the gallery sort of dissolved. It became very messy. What was interesting about that is like just, you know, testing how, you know, if it's something in the material that gives it the power, and obviously you can use that material also to take power away from it. I mean, it's only white paint.
I mean, it's important to challenge the format of every exhibition display, and even the art fair here is taking place in the convention center. It is important to challenge the conventions. I think when something is economically successful, people tend to be a bit lazy. And their thinking patterns start to go in one direction, and they don't want to renew themselves because we want to do it like last year, because then we earned a lot of money. And first, when it starts to hurt a bit, they want to reinvent themselves. When I was a kid, when I was 7 years old, my mom and dad had decorated the Christmas tree exactly the same way each year. And they tried to surprise me with that. And I had to confront them and say, you need to do something else. I mean, you need to do a better job. I'm not surprised anymore.
How many years did it take?
Huh?
How many years did it take?
It took a while. It always hurts. But it kind of sits in me, and when you have experienced a certain amount of art fairs or biennials, you want it to morph and change and look at itself in a new way, so also people who come as guests can feel that there is a certain energy. It's not so good if everyone who participate, artists and dealers and organizers, have this tired look and say, oh yeah, welcome, we want your money, but we didn't really put so much energy into it. I mean, we need to be up on the beat and give people something that is new and interesting.
Iván?
Say something. For me, the one thing that is very effective against, or as institutional critique, is public art, and the way it could be very democratic in the way it's usually not always free to the public, and that's a big difference to art fairs where there is a ticket to pay, and that makes already a separation to the people who can. I mean, not everybody can afford to pay. I don't know how much is the ticket here, but probably $30 or something. I don't know. So, and then going back to what you're saying about Michael Asher, it's also, I mean, for me, also very important artist as institutional critique, but again, it's so academic and it's so hard to understand for people who don't have the knowledge of art history that it also makes complicated to get into the idea of how much institutions affect and shape the artistic practice. But lately I've been very interested in public art because that reason, because I feel that it's a very effective way of taking the art outside the bubble in a way.
And Paco, do you see your position differently because you're an arts writer and curator?
Let me intervene with two issues. One thing is every art fair and every place is different. I'm from Spain, so we had 40 years dictatorship. Arco started in 1982, so we didn't have any contact with contemporary art. Arco was an art fair, a biennial, a museum, was everything. So really filled this gap. Now you're here in Hong Kong. I mean, there is a before and after Art Basel Hong Kong, and the fair helps to construct this Habermasian public art space, because the fair brings people in, but it also stimulates collectors, museums, local networks. So, I mean, the same as a biennial could do, but in a way, that's why I like art fairs. I'm not against art fairs. Miami, I was in Miami in 1997. It was horrible. You know, you went to Miami Beach, you know, hookers, filthy, whatever. After Art Basel, nobody recalls how Miami was, and they changed, you know. It's amazing, and at least it's taken time, but there has been all the PAM Museum and all these museums, collectors opening, whatever. So art fairs do help to create this public artistic sphere. And the second topic I wanted to relate on what Elmgreen and Dragset said. I think that one of the biggest challenges as at an art fair, and me particularly as a curator and you as artists, and this is what you're talking about, is too many artworks. You have to compete. I mean, it's you don't have that kind of motivation or concentration, so the artworks have to be sexy. And unless you are not Gagosian or David Swerner, you have to work on the presentation. So I think that dealers don't work on the presentation. I talk with many dealers and I say to them, hey, come on, paint the wall, work a little bit with the light, whatever. And it's always, I get always the same answer. No, I don't have time, it's expensive. If you do an interesting booth, just a little bit of paint, sequencing the artworks a little bit different with the light, at least you get somebody, I see, hey, this is different. It's not like all those white cubes and booths where it doesn't matter if it's conceptual art, minimal, whatever, it's all the same. So I think that one of the challenges of dealers at art fairs is to work on their museological display or whatever, you know, so that's the thing. That was the two things that I wanted to say.
It is kind of funny because there's like an increasing number of art fairs. I mean, now some galleries that we work with, I think they participate in 22 art fairs a year or something. That's unbearable. I mean, it's an art fair fatigue, but it doesn't really give us more possibility to explore because people are very, very nervous, of course. So maybe we need to refocus.
Yes, you're right. But I think in general, you said about lazy, I talk about, since some years I talk about couch curating. So lazy curating, and I see that at the biennials. It's the same stuff, same concept. So we talk about art fairs, we can bash art fairs, but the biennials is the same stuff. I mean, it's the trendy global biennial model invented by Özge, and it's post-colonialism, it's multiculturalism, globalization. And it's always the same curators. I'm also surprised why in Asia, why they bring in all these European or American curators and all these international artists. I mean, you want to question the model, then do something new, you know? So art fairs are the same, but biennials are the same. I mean, I don't see a big difference, you know? And this idea, the variation of biennials and biennialization of art fairs, that's the way it is. But it only reflects the complexity of today's model, of today's neoliberal system, where it's not black and white, it's not art history, it's not sales, it's not disinterestedness versus whatever. And it has also to do a lot with the kind of funding, private funding, corporate funding, state funding. So it's complicated, but I think that the models between art fairs and biennials are morphing more and more. So, and actually, if you want to know, this is a nice thing to know. I think the former director of Art Basel was Sam Keller, and the director before was Rudolf Lawrence. And in 1999, he said, we are the #1 art fair. We have no competence. And then he went to Venice. And then he saw, oh, Venice is competing with us. Why? Because the dealer was standing in front of the exhibition, of the main exhibition, standing there, walking around and selling the artwork. And this was, the reason why he said, oh, then we got to do something about it. And he came out with this Art Unlimited section, like here, the encounters, big. So we're going to target big museums, big installations, big collectors. And so you see, things are not black and white. They're more grayish, more complicated than we want to admit. It's simple for us to say a biennial is a biennial, art fair is an art fair, but things are a little bit more complicated.
Well, the only thing that I feel that you are saying that is everything you are saying are events that are connected to market, you know, and how to give or not improve, but give more value to the art of the, to the pieces of the artist. Like if you show your work in the Venice Biennial, your prices double in 1 second, you know? And so it's, I think a way, as what you're saying is, if you really want to do something different, step away from the art fair and from the biennials, you know? It's let's go to the beach, you know?
Yes, but this is what it's all about, because if you want to do something different, then you don't do a biennial or you don't do an art fair.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Art fair, you do something different. Because the moment the Guangzhou Biennale does a biennial, it means that you want to be in the system, because the biennial, it's ready-made, it's easy acceptable. I bring in Harald Seemann, and then I bring Charles Ashey, and then Massimiliano Gioni, and then I bring all these Shirin Neshat, Gabriele Rocco, whatever. So, I mean, if you want to question the system, let's not be so lazy. Let's do something different. I don't want to, it's a shameless self-promotion, but I did a festival 48 hours non-stop. It had music. It had live events, DJs, VJs, artists producing on-site 24 hours and exhibiting, whatever. Let's do something different. I see it's what you said. People just want to go for the traditional way. They know how the formula works, and so why would I change it when I know how it works? Only the ones who are not at the top, because the art world is very elitist, only the ones who are not at the top, maybe we want to change it, you know, to get at the top. And once if we get there, then we do the same. We become lazy.
I'm aware of time, and I would like to open up to the floor, but before we do that, do you have questions for each other?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you have questions for each other before we open up to the floor?
Maybe to Paco, if you have been to a fair that looks completely different from this, because I agree. I mean, you travel from Basel to Miami to New York to Hong Kong, and you forget where you are because it really looks the same absolutely everywhere. Have you been to a fair that's slightly different in
There
format?
was one fair in Spain, a small fair that was very funky, because it was just a nice space, but people didn't have booths. So the guy who set it up invited his friends, dealers, and it was like a curated exhibition, and people were not even standing in front of the works or something like that. And I think it's great to explore this kind of formats more, you know. Also, I think artists have to regain power, but also dealers have to regain power, you know? So explore other formats, maybe the condo, this Airbnb stuff or whatever, but do something, you know? Don't stay there, you know? The idea of going to an art fair with your regular booth and your regular artist in the global south doesn't work. So this funny thing, the global south, which it can be Mexico, Bogota, Madrid, Mexico, Dubai, Hong Kong, whatever, you have to set up a strategy. You need to connect to people, find prescriptors, because most of the time if you go to Dubai with your normal booth, your normal artist, or Bogota, you will not sell. It's not like going to New York or London or whatever that probably you can sell everything. No, because that's different. The global south is different, has a different dynamics. It's about connections, prescriptors, and things like that. And if you look at, we go back at the 16th century, you know, when in the Netherlands the market was produced and it became really massive production. So some dealers wanted to export religious paintings to Spain, and from there to Latin America, because they needed all these paintings. So some of these dealers, one dealer sent his son to Seville to live there, you know, to make contacts, whatever. And then that's how we got. Another one looked for another partner in Austria, whatever. You need to do things. The idea of going to an art fair with just my booth and my regular artist most of the time doesn't work. And actually, if you extrapolate to good companies, for example, I know about Spanish construction companies. We had the crisis in Spain. And if you see an interview with one of the top directors, he said, okay, we wanted to go to Mexico. What did we do? Okay, we opened there a small office. We hired 20 people. We started to network. And we know that the first 5 years is investing. And after 5 years, we will be successful. And then they are successful. But actually, being a dealer, or a gallerist, it's like opening a car dealer, or being, you know, not everyone has the money to open a car dealer, because you need a big space, you need money, location, whatever. So, like it or not, I think being a dealer is still very elitist. It's not for everyone. And if you look at art history, who were the main dealers? Come on, Sidney Yanis, Leo Castelli, Follard, Rosenberg, Kahnweiler, whatever. They all had money, or they were from wealthy families, or if not, they had important wealthy partners. So I mean, we have to know what we can do depending on who we are. You know, it's like if I want to present as a curator an exhibition to MoMA. So most of the time, they won't even listen to me. So I'm not going to waste my time presenting a show to MoMA unless I know someone from the board who says, Paco, I will introduce you to the big boss, and maybe he will listen to you and see if your project. So you need to know where, at what level you can play, you know?
Maybe it's a good time to ask for questions and comments. And then we can continue like that, please.
Oh, in the same vein as the art fair, has any one of you seen an interesting biennale that's not like all the other biennales?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
In the same as the discussion of art fairs, looking the same everywhere, anywhere, have any one of you seen a biennale or gone to one that does not look like the rest of the biennales?
I mean, I had the pleasure of seeing the Kochi Biennale this Christmas, and I thought there's some attempts there to do something slightly different. It seems genuinely more engaged in the local community. There is more involvement with groups in the city and in the Indian art scene. There is definitely an exhibition part that maybe have about like 70 artists in it. But then they also organize at the same time a student biennial for art students that gets sort of like almost equal footing. You go through the city and you also happen upon the spaces, or you pass by the spaces that the students are showing in. So it seems to be, you know, it's very different from any other biennials that I have visited.
let me do some promotion from Spanish-speaking countries. You know the manifesta, the walking biennial. So in Central America, you know, they have the Bavich. That's an itinerating biennial, and every 2 years it goes to a different country, to Costa Rica, Panama, whatever. And it's very fascinating because there they have the local biennials that's done in Panama, in Costa Rica, whatever. And from the local biennials, they select artists and they participate in this itinerating biennial. So I like that very much. Not even in Latin America, people know a lot about this biennial, but it's interesting because they're doing something particular, something local, and to create like a network between Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua, whatever. So I mean, you can use an existing format, but you can try to do something different with it, okay? So you will not find there the top artists or the top curators. There are more, but I think it's exciting.
I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Paco Barragán. You've referred to Miami as being filthy and full of hookers before the art fair arrived.
Oh, sorry.
And you seem to have a big focus on doing it differently. Could you please tell us how it is different having prostitution and art fairs in a city?
Oh, that's a difficult.
No, it's not difficult. It's very easy.
No, sorry. Okay, maybe that wasn't such a good comment, and I apologize. But what I meant to say is that before Art Basel Miami, there were only very small galleries, and the scene was not important. And after Art Basel, I mean, the change is radical, you know. Even if you could argue it's only concentrated during that week, okay. But the change has been radical because many collectors have open spaces like the Rubel, De La Cruz, whatever. And then at the beginning there were only a couple of museums, but now you got PAM.
Please refer to that because you referred to prostitution as being filthy.
No,
and
no,
I can easily refer to art fairs as being filthy.
No, I didn't say that. I said that the city was filthy, not prostitution being filthy.
You said filthy and hookers.
No.
Yes, you did, sir.
Okay, but then let me explain. I meant Miami Beach was full of hookers. Okay, it's fine. And then the city was filthy. I mean filthy. Okay? So I hope to have cleared that. But I mean, I don't know where you want to go. I mean, it's not an interesting conversation. I acknowledge you're there among the audience. Okay.
Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah. I'd like to lighten the mood for a moment. And my question is actually about humor. And this is to the artists. Why did you choose to deploy humor in your work that related to the art fairs? Why is that important to you as a strategy and a way of working?
Without any comparison, it's like asking Beckett while he was writing his theater plays the way he did. We don't strategically plan to be humorous. We maybe make projects that shows a certain absurdity of reality, which happens when you reflect on reality sometimes and you find it absurd.
We have a question over here.
So, and I actually think humor is really important and related to my question. One quick point, it feels like we're talking about the system from within the system, and I might say, as Hai-Hsin has, and also Elmgreen and Dragset, who I love, that so many of us, curators, scholars, are really complicit in this system, which is really a complex ecology, right, that we need to continually evolve and be critical of while also existing in it. right? And at times, perhaps, quote unquote, selling out. So I just think it's really important to be very self-reflexive as we all move through this system. But to touch on humor, I really love the question, and I love the idea of humor, because my question really is about audience, right? Iván talked a bit about public art and the way in which public art offers a different point of entry for diverse audiences. I'm very concerned with that as a scholar and a curator, and I really believe artists create work to be seen and engaged at the end of the day. An art fair offers another audience, as Paco noted. Perhaps we need to think broadly about that audience and the next generation of audiences and how that can translate into collectors. But I'm wondering if any of you can comment a little bit more. I mean, Hai-Hsin, at the core of your work is audience and kind of public engagement, a little bit more about the importance of audience, the importance of diversifying audience, and the significance of that to you in your work and your practice.
And to me, this is the first time I participate as an exhibitor in a big art fair. So I feel myself is more in between the audience and the artist, exhibitor self. So, and also usually I work on the experience I experienced in my daily life. So that is very important to me, my work, and I can bring people the similar experience, kind of deja vu, and people can relate it to it and to arouse some emotional reflection. So that is very important to me. So it's like asking me why are you funny? But it's me. It's just my personality, and it's just really natural to do this for my work. Yeah.
Can you, Dagmar and Michael, explain a little bit, because I found the image of the Grand Palais with one booth. Can you explain a little bit how you came up with that idea? Because I find the image very hallucinating.
Often the single booth in an art fair is actually not as bad as you claim, I think. Actually, I think many dealers put quite an effort into composing a visual and a concept that is meaningful. But when it's bunched up side by side, it can appear to be a little bit cacophonic and overwhelming and a little bit too varied and colorful, maybe. So we thought, how does it actually look with a single booth in the big Grand Palais, placed exactly on the location where it will be 1 month later? So we asked our French dealer, Emmanuel Perrotin, if we could have Grand Palais one day, exactly 1 month before, and then we could curate his stand for that year. So we asked the artists to come up with different projects. And then we showed the booth there and had 5,000 people coming in one day just to look at that one booth. You had to walk in a big empty hall for almost 5 minutes until you would reach that booth. And 1 month later, it was located exactly at the same spot, but with all the other booths around.
So it's a bit like taking ownership or something. I mean, we claim the art fair booth as a sculpture in itself. And that was similar to something we had done as one of our very early projects, where we actually dug down a whole white cube gallery in the ground in front of the National Museum in Reykjavik on Iceland, shifting the gaze of the viewer, so the gallery sort of became like a tomb below you.
We have a question over here.
Hello, thank you so much for this interesting conversation. I was going to ask a question, but then I decided not to ask because when Elmgreen Dragset mentioned about the off spaces and artist places, actually maybe it's also a nice chance to promote also alternative fairs, because actually there are now increasing number of art fairs which only invites project spaces and artist-run spaces, and their audience is not the audience of Art Basel or Frieze or other blue chip galleries. So thank you.
Do you want to mention some other maybe?
Supermarket at Zurich, pop positions in Belgium, and platform projects in Athens.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a good
Thank
time,
you
good
so
note
much,
to
everyone.
end. Thank you so much. Thank you.